I remember the weight of that pen in my hand, heavy as a pistol, final as a death sentence. My signature sprawled across that marriage contract like a wounded animal, dragging itself across the parched paper. The lawyer, a thin, spectral man from the county seat, watched with eyes that betrayed nothing, just the mechanical observation of a transaction completed. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and broken promises across my land. The sky had turned the color of an old bruise, purple and yellow at the edges, angry at the center. A storm was coming, one of the bad ones that stripped paint from buildings and hope from men's hearts. The men stood by the door, hats in hand, eyes down. They thought me a fool. Perhaps I was. A plain woman for a plain life, I told them, not meeting their gaze. The words tasted like copper in my mouth, like blood, or surrender. Miller, my foreman of 20 years, cleared his throat, but said nothing. He knew better. They all did. When I dismissed them with a wave of my hand, they filed out like mourners from a funeral. My funeral, perhaps. The death of whatever dignity I had left. I poured another whiskey, letting it burn away the doubt. The bottle was nearly empty now. It had been full when the letter arrived that morning. On the mantel, her portrait watched, Sarah, the woman who'd left me for greener pastures and a man with softer hands. The frame was dusty now. Everything was. I hadn't allowed the housekeeper to touch it in years. Punishment, perhaps. For Sarah. For myself. For daring to believe in something as foolish as love in a land that took more than it gave. The first drops of rain hit the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. I ignored them, just as I ignored the hollow feeling spreading beneath my ribs. That night, I dreamt of faceless women and empty cradles. When I woke, the wind was still howling, as if God himself was laughing at what I'd done. My name is Elijah Vance, and I built this ranch with blood and stubbornness. 15,000 acres of what was once paradise, now cracked and thirsty under an unforgiving sun. The Rocking V, they call it. Once the pride of the territory, now a fading empire of dust and dying grass. I've watched the land change, just as I felt my own body betray me. The limp from that night, the herd spooked, the lines that mapped my face like the dry creek beds that snaked through my property. I was young when I claimed this land. 30 years ago, my hair was black as sin and my back was straight as a fence post. I rode from sunup to sundown, breaking horses that men said couldn't be broken, building something from nothing with hands that bled and blistered but never faltered. Now my hair is the color of the winter sky, and my back protests every morning when I rise. But it's my eyes that have changed the most. I catch glimpses of myself sometimes, in a watering trough or the cloudy mirror in the washroom, and I don't recognize the man staring back. Something hard has settled there, something unyielding. The local folk call me prideful. Behind their hands, they whisper that my heart turned to leather the day Sarah disappeared with that piano player from Amarillo. They're not entirely wrong. I keep to myself mostly, speak more to cattle than to people. Miller has been with me through the good years and the bad, and still calls me sir. Not out of respect, I suspect, but out of the distance I've placed between myself and the world. The other hands are the same. They do their jobs, collect their pay, and give the big house a wide berth. In town, men nod in my direction but rarely approach. Women cross to the other side of the street. Children stare with the unfiltered curiosity of the young, until their mothers hush them with whispers about the mean old rancher who lives alone with his ghosts. I never thought to marry again, but land needs heirs. Banks need assurances. And even the strongest man gets tired of staring at empty chairs across empty tables. The letter from Lawrence Blackwood arrived on a Tuesday. His daughter for my debt. A simple equation. A business arrangement between men who understood that sentiment had no place in survival. So when that letter came, offering a woman's hand in exchange for settling an old debt to her father, a merchant I'd once borrowed from in leaner times, I found myself considering it with a strange detachment. She's no beauty, the letter warned, but she will not shame you. I told myself that beauty had no place out here anyway. That was the lie I lived with as I mailed my acceptance. The letter arrived in spring. A neat, practical hand on cream-colored paper that seemed too delicate for this harsh country. Lawrence Blackwood, her father, wrote like a man used to tallying accounts. My daughter Evelyn is 26, educated but not frivolous. She keeps a good house and knows the value of economy. She has served as my housekeeper since her mother's passing 10 years ago, and while she has received offers from local men, none have been of suitable standing. She understands her duty and will make a proper wife. Not a word about laughter or dreams. Nothing about what made her soul spark. Just a transaction. Woman for debt. Flesh for ledger entry. The photograph he enclosed showed a somber-faced young woman in a high-necked dress, hair pulled severely back from a face that was neither beautiful nor ugly. Just unremarkable, like a cup or a chair. Functional. I studied it for longer than I care to admit, searching for some clue to the person behind those level gray eyes. Finding nothing, or perhaps not knowing how to look. I tucked it away in my desk drawer beneath the property deeds and the old Colt revolver I kept for wolves, both the four-legged and two-legged kind. Besides Sarah's last letter, the one that explained, in handwriting that grew increasingly hurried and slanted toward the bottom of the page, why she couldn't bear another winter in this godforsaken place with a man who loved the land more than he loved her. The men asked questions at first, curious about what kind of woman would agree to marry a man twice her age with a reputation like mine. I offered no answers, and eventually they stopped asking. We went about our work, mending fences, doctoring calves, racing summer storms to bring in hay. Life continued, but in the quiet moments, I found myself wondering about this plain woman from back east. What desperation led her to accept such a bargain? What kind of life had she led to make her willing to tie herself to a stranger in a strange land? I told myself it didn't matter. Marriage wasn't about understanding. It was about endurance. Another harsh reality of life out here, where even love must be practical to survive. The weeks passed. Spring softened into summer. The land baked under a merciless sun, and we moved the cattle higher into the foothills where the grass still grew. I wrote to Blackwood, arranging for Evelyn's travel. His response was prompt, businesslike. She would arrive on the last Tuesday of July. He expected the debt to be settled in full upon her arrival. No mention of a wedding ceremony. No questions about what kind of home his daughter was coming to. Just the cold mathematics of exchange. I found myself growing irritated with this unseen man and his bloodless approach to his daughter's future, then reminded myself that I was no better. This was about necessity, not romance. About pragmatism, not passion. I informed Miller that Mrs. Vance, the name fell out on my tongue, would be arriving soon. Told him to have the men clean up the yard, at least, to make sure there were no dead animals or empty bottles lying about. He nodded, eyes carefully blank. But that evening, I noticed him directing the youngest hand to sweep the front porch. Saw an older man, named Garcia, repairing the broken step that I'd been meaning to fix for years. Small gestures, like flowers laid on a grave. Respect, perhaps, for what was about to be buried. My solitude, Evelyn's freedom. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, a stern-faced widow who came 3 times a week to prevent the house from falling completely into disrepair, took the news with surprising enthusiasm. The next day, she arrived with 2 younger women I'd never seen before, armed with brooms and mops and vinegar. They attacked the house like an invading army, scrubbing and polishing and rearranging. I retreated to the barn, uncomfortable with the flurry of feminine energy that had suddenly invaded my carefully maintained isolation. When I returned that evening, the house smelled different. The layers of dust and neglect had been stripped away, revealing the bones of what had once been a fine home. Sarah's home, briefly, and now to be Evelyn's. The thought sat uneasily in my chest, a stone I couldn't dislodge. The stagecoach arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because we'd been branding all morning, and my hands were black with soot and blood. The air was thick with the smell of burning hair and hide, the bawling of confused calves, the curses of tired men. I didn't hear it approach. The wind had picked up again, carrying away sounds and replacing them with its own mournful howling. Miller spotted it first, nudging me and nodding toward the horizon. "Your bride," he said simply. 2 words that landed like physical blows. I wiped my hands on my trousers, suddenly aware of how the place must look to Eastern eyes. The house, once grand, now weather-beaten and gray. The barn missing boards from the last big storm. Even the garden Sarah had planted had long since surrendered to weeds and neglect. The coach stopped in a cloud of dust. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open, and she stepped down. Gray dress, high-necked, and plain as promised. Brown hair pulled back severely from her face. From a distance, nothing remarkable. But something in how she stood, straight-backed against the wind, surveying what was to be her new home without flinching, caught in my throat like a fishbone. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just picked up her small suitcase before the driver could assist and waited. I limped forward, suddenly conscious of every step, of the eyes watching from the branding fire, of my own appearance, unshaven, filthy, smelling of cattle and sweat. Not how I'd imagined meeting my bride, though in truth, I tried not to imagine it at all. "Miss Blackwood," I said, my voice rough from disuse. She looked up at me then, and I saw her eyes for the first time. Gray. Not warm, not cold. Just watching. Assessing. "Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice lower than I expected, steadier. "I believe it's Mrs. Vance now, according to the papers." No tremor in her voice. No tears. Just fact. I offered my arm, suddenly unsure of the protocol. She took it, her grip firm through her gloves. Together, we walked toward the house, looking for all the world like 2 strangers meeting on a battlefield after the fighting was done. Behind us, the stagecoach pulled away, wheels grinding in the dirt. The sound of retreat, or perhaps of a door closing on the past. Either way, there was no going back now. For either of us. The first days passed in awkward silence. I showed her the house, explained the routine of the ranch. She listened carefully, asking practical questions about water supplies and winter preparations. No complaints about the peeling paint or the Spartan furnishings. No weeping for the life she'd left behind. Just that steady gaze, taking everything in. The men watched her cautiously, expecting tears or tantrums. Instead, she rose before dawn each morning, dressed in the same 3 serviceable dresses rotated with military precision, and set about bringing order to chaos. I found her in the garden one morning, hands already dirty, meticulously pulling weeds from what once had been Sarah's pride. "You don't need to do that," I said, uncomfortable with her labor. She didn't look up. "Yes, I do," she replied. "A garden feeds the body and the soul." It was the first personal thing she'd said. I didn't know how to respond, so I left her to it. But that night, I noticed Miller had assigned one of the young hands to help clear the larger stones from the plots. The next day, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing decades of grime from cupboards. The day after, I found her in the stables, gentling a nervous colt with quiet words and steady hands. "Where did you learn that?" I asked, genuinely curious. Something like a smile touched her lips. "My uncle raised Morgans in Vermont. I spent summers there as a girl." Then the almost smile disappeared, and she was all efficiency again. "Your tack room is a disgrace, Mr. Vance. I've organized it by function." And she was gone before I could thank her or apologize. I wasn't sure which was needed. We slept in separate rooms, of course. I had cleared out my mother's old chamber, and used since her death 15 years ago. It was the finest room in the house, with windows that caught the morning light and a view of the distant mountains. At night, I would lie awake in my own Spartan quarters, aware of her presence down the hall. Not in a carnal way, but in the way you're aware of a storm approaching. A fundamental change in the atmosphere. Sometimes I heard her moving about, the soft pad of stocking feet, the creak of a chair. Once, the sound of quiet weeping quickly stifled. I didn't acknowledge it the next morning, nor did she. We continued our careful dance of politeness, like actors reading from a script neither of us had written. But something was shifting, in the house, in the air between us, in me. Weeks passed. The rhythms of the ranch continued. Cattle to move, hay to cut, endless repairs to make on fences and buildings that seemed determined to surrender to entropy. Evelyn found her place in this harsh world with a grace that surprised me. She didn't shy away from the realities of ranch life. The blood, the dirt, the constant struggle against nature's indifference. Instead, she met them head-on, with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. The hands began to tip their hats when she passed. Mrs. Winters, who I'd expected to resent the younger woman's presence, instead became almost maternal, bringing small gifts, a pot of jam, a cutting from her own garden. Even the animals responded to her. The skittish mare that no one could get near allowed Evelyn to stroke her nose. The half-wild barn cats appeared at the kitchen door each morning, waiting for the scraps she saved them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to change. Curtains appeared at windows long left bare. A vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table. The smell of baking bread instead of dust and neglect. Small things. Insignificant, perhaps, but they wormed their way under my skin, making me aware of how empty the place had been before. How empty I had been. One night at supper, a meal we typically ate in silence, she surprised me with a question. "Why did you agree to this arrangement, Mr. Vance?" I looked up from my plate, caught off guard. "The marriage, you mean?" She nodded, those gray eyes steady on mine. I considered lying, considered giving her the simple answer about heirs and banks and practicalities. Instead, I found myself saying, because the silence gets loud after a while. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps. She nodded once, then returned to her meal. But later, as she cleared the plates, she paused beside me. "My father's house was very quiet," she said softly. "After Mother died, then she was gone, leaving me with the strange sense that a door had been opened between us. Just a crack, but enough to let in a breath of something new." It was evening, nearly a month after her arrival. The days were growing shorter, the nights cooler. I came in from checking the north pasture to find the house quiet. A lamp burned low in the parlor, a room I rarely entered anymore. Following the light, I found her standing by the fireplace, a piece of paper in her hands. She didn't hear me approach, lost in whatever she was reading. It was only when I cleared my throat that she turned, startled, and I saw it then, Sarah's portrait in her hands. The one I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer for years. The one I couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring myself to burn. Evelyn's face gave nothing away, but her knuckles were white against the gilded frame. At her feet lay a crumpled letter, one of Sarah's old notes, filled with promises she never kept. For a moment, we stood frozen, the ghost of my past love between us. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't come here to be compared to a ghost, Mr. Vance." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I had been comparing them, this plain, sturdy woman with the golden, laughing Sarah, measuring Evelyn against a memory that had grown more perfect with each passing year. And suddenly I saw her, really saw her. The intelligence in those gray eyes, the strength in her capable hands, the dignity with which she faced a life married to a stranger who couldn't even offer her the courtesy of seeing her as herself. "I never asked about her," Evelyn continued, placing the portrait face down on the mantel, "because I thought you'd tell me when you were ready. But I need to know, am I a replacement? Or am I your wife?" The question hung between us, simple and devastating. And I realized that I had never been blind to beauty. I had been blind to truth. "You are not a replacement," I said finally, the words feeling rough and unpracticed in my mouth. "You never could be. You are." I struggled, and used to the vulnerability of honesty. "You are yourself, and I have not been fair to you." She studied my face, searching for something. Whether she found it, I couldn't tell. But she nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we can begin again," she said. "Not as ghosts or replacements, but as two people who find themselves sharing a life." She held out her hand, a gesture so simple yet so brave that it humbled me. I took it, feeling the calluses that hadn't been there when she arrived. Evidence of her adaptation, her strength. "Elijah," I said. "My name is Elijah." It was the first time I'd invited her to use it. A small offering, but the only one I knew how to make in that moment. "Evelyn," she replied, a hint of a smile softening her features. And for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something like possibility in the space between us. The lightning came without warning. One moment, the sky was clear. The next, it was split open, white-hot veins cracking across the heavens. In this country, dry storms are more feared than any downpour. No rain to dampen the spark, just electricity and tender dry grass. The first bolt hit the far pasture. Within minutes, a wall of flame was racing toward the ranch house, devouring everything in its path. The air filled with the panicked bellowing of cattle and the shouts of men. I was in the barn when it started, checking on a mare about to foal. Miller burst in, his face streaked with soot. "Fire in the south pasture," he gasped. "Moving fast." I didn't need to ask what that meant. The summer had been brutal, the grass dry as paper. We'd lose everything if the flames reached the main buildings. "Get the men," I ordered. "Fire breaks around the house and barn. Move the stock to the creek if you can." He nodded and disappeared. I turned to saddle my horse, then realized I hadn't seen Evelyn since breakfast. "Miller," I shouted after him. "Where's Mrs. Vance?" He paused at the door. "Saw her heading to the old barn earlier. Something about checking on that orphan calf." The old barn, a quarter-mile from the main house, directly in the path of the fire. I felt the blood drain from my face. Miller saw it too. "Go," he said simply. "We'll handle things here." I didn't remember mounting my horse. Didn't feel the heat as I rode toward the flames. All I knew was that Evelyn was there. My wife, not Sarah's replacement, and that I would not lose her too. The old barn was already smoldering when I arrived, smoke pouring from the hayloft. I called her name, my voice lost in the roar of the approaching flames. No answer. Tying my bandana over my nose and mouth, I plunged into the smoke. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, like walking into a furnace. Timbers cracked overhead, weakened by age and now by fire. I found her in the back stall, her dress torn, hands bleeding as she tried to calm the panicked calf. Our eyes met through the thickening smoke. No fear in hers, just that steady resolve. "We need to go," I shouted. "Now." She nodded, but gestured to the calf. "He'll die." Simple words, matter of fact, but I understood what she was really saying. This small life mattered to her, and in that moment, I realized it mattered to me too. Together, we got the calf out, stumbling through falling timbers and choking ash. Outside, the world was apocalyptic. Half my herd, half my fortune, consumed by flame. My men fighting a losing battle against nature's fury. And yet, as I looked down at Evelyn, her face smudged with soot, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, I felt a strange sense of peace. "You should have saved the cattle," she said, coughing. I shook my head. "No, Rabia, I shouldn't have." And for the first time since she'd arrived, I took her hand of my own accord. We stood together, watching as the fire took what it wanted, powerless to stop it, but somehow not defeated. A plain woman, a plain life. And yet in that moment of destruction, I felt the first stirrings of something I'd thought long dead. Hope. The fire burned for 3 days. We fought it with everything we had, shovels and wet blankets, and the strength of desperate men. In the end, it was nature that saved us, not our own efforts. A sudden downpour, rare for that time of year, that extinguished the flames and left behind a blackened wasteland where once green pastures had stretched. We lost nearly half the herd, 2 outbuildings, countless acres of grazing land that would take years to recover. But the house still stood, the main barn, and no lives, human or animal, had been lost. Small mercies, but I found myself grateful for them in a way I hadn't felt gratitude in years. Evelyn worked alongside us through it all, tending to burns, carrying water, cooking meals for exhausted men. I watched her move through smoke and chaos with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and something shifted in my chest. A recognition, perhaps, or an awakening. When it was over, when the last ember had been extinguished and the men had been sent to rest, we stood together on the porch, surveying the damage. "We'll rebuild," she said, not a question but a statement. I glanced at her, surprised by the we, by the assumption of continuity, of partnership. "Yes," I agreed. We will. The word felt right on my tongue. Not just me against the world anymore. We. Us. That night, for the first time, I knocked on her door. Not for carnal reasons, but because I didn't want to be alone with the smell of smoke still in my nostrils and the image of her in that burning barn branded into my brain. She opened it, already in her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she stepped aside, making room for me to enter. We sat together by the window, watching the stars emerge from behind dissipating clouds. Not touching, not speaking, just existing in the same space, bound by something neither of us had expected to find. When I finally rose to leave, she caught my hand. "Stay," she said simply. So I did. We slept side by side, like children, drawing comfort from each other's presence. In the morning, I woke to find her watching me, those gray eyes thoughtful. "You snore," she informed me. And then she smiled, a real smile, not the ghost of one. It transformed her face, illuminating features I had dismissed as plain. In that moment, I realized that beauty wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't golden hair or a laughing mouth. It was strength, dignity, the courage to reach for connection in a world that offered little tenderness. I touched her cheek, this woman who had come to me as a stranger and was becoming something else entirely. "So do you," I replied. And she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard before, rich and warm and unexpectedly sweet, like finding water in the desert. Months have passed. Winter came and went, harsh as always, but somehow less lonely. Spring has returned, bringing new calves and green shoots in Evelyn's garden. The ranch is smaller now. We sold the east section to pay debts after the fire. The house is still weathered, but no longer neglected. Fresh paint on the porch. New curtains and windows that are actually clean enough to let light through. In the evenings, Evelyn plays the old piano we found buried under sheets in the parlor. Her fingers aren't graceful, but they're persistent, coaxing music from warped keys and strings too long untouched. I sit and listen, not hiding my limp or my gray hair or the rough edges of a man too long alone. She doesn't expect me to be someone I'm not, and I've stopped expecting her to be anyone but herself. The gold band on my fingers still feels strange sometimes. I catch myself twisting it, this tangible reminder of promises made and kept. Not out of passion, at first, but out of something that has grown stronger with time. Respect. Understanding. And yes, a kind of love I never expected to find. Not the wild, desperate thing I felt for Sarah. Something quieter, steadier. Like Evelyn herself, the land is beginning to recover from the fire. New grass pushing through blackened earth. Life reasserting itself with stubborn persistence. Like us, we still have hard days. Moments when the old ghosts resurface. Times when I retreat into silence and she into efficiency. But we're learning each other's rhythms. Finding our way through this unexpected partnership one day at a time. Last night, I found her at the window, watching a spring storm roll in across the plains. Lightning in the distance, but gentle rain this time, not fire. I stood beside her, our shoulders touching. "Do you regret it?" I asked suddenly. "Coming here." She was quiet, so long I thought she might not answer. Then she turned to me, those gray eyes soft in the lamplight. "I expected a prison," she said simply. "I found a home instead." I took her hand then, this plain woman who had revealed herself to be anything but. Outside, the rain continued, washing away dust, nourishing seeds long dormant. And inside, we stood together, two people who had found each other after giving up on being found. The world will still call her plain. Let them. I know better now. True beauty, like true worth, reveals itself slowly, to eyes patient enough to see. In the growing darkness, I can just make out our reflection in the window glass. Not young lovers, not perfect specimens, just a man and a woman, weathered by life but still standing, still reaching for each other across the divide of their separate pasts. And in that imperfect image, I see something I never expected to find again, something I never truly had before, even with Sarah. Not passion, not infatuation, but companionship, understanding. a shared path forward through whatever storms still await us. The piano sits silent now. The house settles around us with the familiar creaks and sighs of an aging structure. But it's no longer empty, no longer haunted. Evelyn squeezes my hand, and I squeeze back. A simple gesture, but in it lies everything that matters. A plain woman, a plain life, and yet somehow more than enough.